The crowd's laughter echoed across the archery range. She stood at the line, jeans dusty, a plain shirt clinging to her frame. "Are you sure you belong here?" A sneering voice cut through the air. She didn't reply. Her bow did the talking. One arrow. Two arrows. The bullseye shattered in a perfect split. Welcome to Stories by Xavier. Let's uncover what really happened. I never expected anyone to take me seriously when I first stepped onto that archery range. Wearing my old jeans and a plain shirt, I was just another face to them. A simple woman who looked like she didn't belong. The kind of person people scoff at, quietly whispering, "Who's she kidding?" But archery was my escape. It wasn't about fancy gear or trophies. It was about the steady rhythm of drawing the bow, the quiet focus as the arrow sailed through the air. I found peace in those moments, a sense of control I couldn't find anywhere else. When I arrived at the prestigious range that morning, the glances were sharp. Whispers floated around me, some amused, some outright mocking. One man, a seasoned archer with years of medals lining his walls, gave me a smirk so thin it could have cut glass. "You sure you're in the right place?" he said loud enough for others to hear. The laughter that followed wasn't kind. I felt the sting of it, sure, but I didn't flinch. They didn't know me. They hadn't seen the hours of practice behind my steady hands, the sacrifices made to save enough for this one chance. This wasn't about proving them wrong, not exactly. It was about proving myself right. The range smelled of fresh-cut wood and tension. The targets stood tall, waiting to be challenged. Around me, the chatter buzzed with disbelief and amusement. I didn't say a word. Instead, I knocked my arrow, drew my bowstring back slowly, and took a breath that steadied every part of me. This was my moment, quiet, unassuming, but ready. They could laugh now, but soon enough, their laughter would be swallowed by the sharp crack of an arrow splitting another. And then, nothing would be the same again. When I first arrived at the archery range, it was like stepping into another world, one that didn't quite feel made for someone like me. The grounds were immaculate. Freshly mown grass, polished wooden benches, and rows of gleaming bows displayed like trophies. The other archers moved with an easy confidence, their clothes clean and tailored, their equipment pristine and expensive. I wore my usual faded jeans, a simple shirt, and sturdy boots. Nothing flashy. No logo or brand to mark me as one of them. I knew the stares would come, but I didn't expect how sharp they'd be. Eyes narrowed in judgment. Whispers exchanged just loud enough for me to catch fragments. "Who let her in? Look at that getup. She's probably just here for show." The range manager was polite but distant. He gave me a quick nod, his eyes flicking over me like a checklist. Not exactly welcoming, but not hostile either. I signed in quietly, then stepped toward the shooting line, where other archers were warming up. Their bows twanged in unison like a practiced orchestra. One of the veterans, a man named Carl who'd won state championships more times than I could count, glanced my way and smirked. "Don't get your hopes up," he said loud enough for a few nearby archers to hear. "This isn't a playground for dreamers." I met his gaze without blinking. No words came out. I didn't need to explain myself. My bow and arrows were all the voice I needed. As I settled into my stance, I noticed a few other archers exchanging skeptical looks. I was clearly the outsider, the woman who didn't fit their idea of what an archer should be. But as my fingers gripped the bowstring and the sun warmed my skin, I reminded myself why I was here. Not for approval, not for trophies or applause, but for the silent moments when all that mattered was the target, the arrow, and the feeling of true focus. The crowd's murmurs faded into background noise. This was my sanctuary, and I was ready to show them what a simple woman could do. The murmurs started almost immediately. As I stood there, bow in hand, preparing to take my first shots, the whispers grew louder. Some were curious, but most were full of doubt, even amusement. A few of the archers nearby exchanged glances, smirks tugging at their lips. One woman, perfectly coiffed and dressed in sleek sportswear, tilted her head and laughed softly. "Does she really think she can compete with us?" she said to her friend, loud enough for me to hear. I didn't bother responding. There was no point in engaging with her judgments. Their voices were just noise, distractions trying to rattle the calm I'd spent years building. What mattered was the string, the arrow, the target. As I knocked my first arrow, I felt eyes on me, calculating, waiting for me to fail. I drew back, my muscles steady despite the tension swirling around me. I focused on the center of the target, the bullseye glowing bright in the morning sun. I released. The arrow sailed true, striking just shy of the bullseye. A collective, quiet murmur rippled through the crowd. Surprise, maybe, but also disbelief. Some rolled their eyes. "Beginner's luck," muttered a man near the sidelines. My second shot went closer, right at the edge of the bullseye ring. The laughter stilled for a moment, replaced by low whispers. Could she actually be good? But still, a few hardened skeptics shook their heads. "Looks like she's all talk," someone said. "Wait till the real competition starts." I felt a flicker of doubt, but I swallowed it. I'd faced tougher crowds, harsher critics. This was just another test, and I was determined to pass. More arrows followed, each shot a little steadier, a little truer. The sneers began to fade, replaced with cautious respect from some of the younger archers. By the time I lowered my bow after my first round, the mood had shifted subtly but noticeably. The woman in the sleek sportswear didn't laugh anymore. Instead, she nodded curtly, acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, I belonged here after all. But there was one shot left, the one that would make them stop doubting for good. I felt the weight of every pair of eyes as I prepared for my next shot. The laughter had faded, replaced by a tense quiet that felt heavier than any mockery. Everyone was waiting, some with hope, others with skepticism, to see what I would do next. I took a slow breath, centering myself. This wasn't just about hitting a target anymore. It was about breaking through the walls they'd built around their expectations. Their judgments were loud, but they couldn't reach me if I didn't let them. My fingers settled on the bowstring, pulling it back with practiced ease. The world narrowed to just me, the bow, and the bullseye waiting patiently in the distance. I could almost feel the tension in the air shift, as if even the wind was holding its breath. When I released, the arrow flew straight and fast, cutting through the space between me and the target like a whispered promise. It struck cleanly, right in the center. The bullseye. For a moment, the crowd was silent. You could hear the pin drop. Then a few gasps, murmurs of disbelief, and the unmistakable sound of someone exhaling sharply. I lowered my bow slowly, trying not to smile too much. I knew what that shot meant. It wasn't just about skill, it was about presence. About being seen for who I was beneath the simple clothes and quiet demeanor. A man near the sidelines, someone who had sneered the loudest earlier, swallowed hard and muttered, "Well, I didn't expect that." Some of the younger archers exchanged looks, eyes wide, respect growing like a slow fire. But not everyone was ready to accept it. A woman I overheard whisper, "Beginner's luck. One good shot doesn't mean she belongs." I knew the road ahead was still long. This was only the beginning. But that arrow, that perfect shot, was proof that appearances could be deceiving. That day, I wasn't just a simple woman on the archery range. I was a force no one saw coming. I've always been drawn to archery, even when no one else around me understood why. Growing up, I wasn't the girl with the latest gadgets or the fanciest clothes. My world was quieter, filled with books, nature, and the simple joy of practicing with a bow my grandfather had given me when I was a kid. Back then, the backyard was my range. I didn't have coaches or fancy lessons, just me, my arrows, and the steady hum of determination. I remember the countless afternoons spent perfecting my stance, watching my arrows fly, sometimes missing, often hitting. It wasn't about winning trophies. It was about mastering something that made me feel strong and steady. I taught myself to listen to the rhythm, the pull of the string, the flight of the arrow, the satisfying thud when it hit the target. Archery became more than a hobby. It became my anchor, my escape from the chaos of everyday life. There were moments I wanted to give up, when the arrows missed, when my arms ached, or when people told me I was wasting my time. But something inside kept me going, a quiet voice telling me I was capable of more than they believed. That voice is what brought me here today, standing on this prestigious range, facing a crowd that doubts me. They don't see the years of practice, the early mornings, or the quiet nights spent perfecting every shot. They only see the simple woman in jeans and a plain shirt. But I know who I am beneath all that. I'm someone who has fought for every inch of progress, who has faced judgment and walked through it without losing herself. This is more than a competition. It's a chance to rewrite what they think is possible. Every arrow I shoot carries the weight of my journey, the doubts, the dreams, and the unwavering belief that sometimes the quietest voice is the one that hits the loudest. I didn't have coaches or fancy lessons, but I made up for it with relentless practice. Every spare moment was spent at the range or in the woods behind my house, perfecting my aim and refining my technique. I watched videos, read every book I could find on archery, and taught myself to read the subtle cues, the way the wind shifted, how my breath affected the bow, and the rhythm of releasing an arrow. I learned to be patient with myself. Archery isn't about rushing. It's about precision, control, and mental focus. There were days when frustration overwhelmed me, when arrows missed the mark, when my hands trembled, or when my muscles ached. But I pushed through every setback. Slowly, I noticed my shots getting tighter, more consistent. I could feel in my bones, the confidence growing like a quiet fire. It wasn't just about hitting the target anymore. It was about mastering myself, keeping calm even when everything else screamed chaos. What others called luck was really years of quiet work and discipline. People told me I was foolish for dreaming about competing on bigger stages. Archery is for the elite, they'd say. You'll never make it past local contests. Their words stung, but I never let them define me. I wanted to prove that skill and heart mattered more than pedigree or fancy gear. That's why today was so important. The prestigious range, the skeptical crowd, all of it was a challenge I welcomed. I wanted to show them that a simple woman with determination could break through walls built on assumptions. And though I still felt the weight of their doubt pressing down on me, I felt something else too, a quiet strength. Because I knew the real competition wasn't with the archers around me. It was with every moment I almost gave up. And with every arrow I drew, I was winning. The first round of shots was nerve-wracking. I could feel the tension in my shoulders, the slight tremor in my hands, the familiar battle between calm and doubt. Each arrow I knocked carried the weight of all those years of practice, but also the pressure of proving myself to a crowd that barely wanted me there. As I raised my bow for the first shot, I blocked out everything except the target. The crisp air filled my lungs, and my eyes locked onto the bullseye like a hawk zeroing in on its prey. I drew the string back slowly, feeling the tension build, then released. The arrow flew true, landing just outside the bullseye. Not perfect, but close enough to make me smile inwardly. I glanced at the crowd. A few eyes widened in surprise, but most still looked skeptical. My next few arrows followed a similar path, solid, steady, but not flawless. Some grazed the bullseye's edge, others landed in the rings just outside. I knew I had room to improve, but I could tell the crowd was starting to notice something different. Whispers spread. She's not terrible. Maybe she's serious after all. A few younger archers exchanged nods of approval. But the veterans? Their smirks lingered. One in particular, a tall man with graying hair named Vince, shook his head and muttered, "Not bad for a beginner, but she's not winning anything here." I let their words slide. This wasn't a battle of words. It was a battle of arrows. Between shots, I focused on my breathing, slow, deliberate. I tuned out the snickers and the doubtful stares. Every time I released, I reminded myself why I love this. The discipline, the focus, the moment of connection between bow, arrow, and target. By the end of the round, I'd earned a few nods and quiet smiles. It wasn't victory yet, but it was progress. And progress was everything. The crowd's amusement hadn't vanished. It had shifted, taken on a new shape. Instead of outright laughter, there was now a cautious curiosity simmering beneath their whispers. Some spectators leaned in, trying to catch every detail of my shots, while others exchanged skeptical glances, unwilling to admit they were intrigued. I caught a few sideways looks from the younger archers, their expressions betraying a mixture of surprise and respect. They were watching closely, maybe even hoping I'd succeed. But the veterans remained guarded, their smiles tight, their eyes calculating. Not bad. I heard someone mutter. For a nobody. It stung, but also fueled something inside me. I wasn't just fighting to hit the target. I was fighting against every assumption, every whisper that tried to box me into a corner. Between shots, I studied the range. The wind was picking up slightly, stirring the leaves and adding a subtle challenge. But I welcomed it. Archery isn't just about strength. It's about reading the world around you, adjusting to its changes, staying steady even when things shift unexpectedly. I could feel my muscles settling into a rhythm. My breathing slowed. The arrow rested against the bow, and for a moment, time seemed to slow with it. I drew back, muscles coiling like a spring, and let the arrow fly. It struck the bullseye with a satisfying thud. The sound was almost louder than the crowd's stunned silence. I lowered my bow slowly, feeling the weight of their eyes, the shift in the air. A few whispered words of astonishment floated my way. The woman in sleek sportswear who'd laughed earlier didn't say a word. Instead, she watched me with something like grudging respect. But some still shook their heads, dismissing the shot as a fluke, a lucky break. I knew better. Luck doesn't split arrows. Skill does. Doubt is a quiet enemy. It creeps in between shots, settling in the back of your mind when you least expect it. As I stood on that archery range, hearing the murmurs around me, a flicker of uncertainty tried to take root. Can I really do this? The question whispered softly, like a shadow trying to distract me. But I wasn't new to doubt. It had followed me for years, through every missed shot, every harsh word from those who didn't believe I belonged. I learned to recognize it, and more importantly, to push it aside. I reminded myself why I was here. Not for their approval, not to prove a point to the crowd, but because I love this. The silence between the release of the arrow and its landing, the perfect tension of the bowstring, the focus it demanded. I closed my eyes briefly and felt the familiar calm wash over me. The world narrowed until it was just me, my bow, and the target. When I opened my eyes, I saw the range through new clarity. The rustling leaves, the shifting light, the subtle changes in wind, each a part of the challenge. I adjusted my stance, took a deep breath, and nocked my arrow. This time, when I released, the arrow flew with the kind of precision born from countless hours of practice and belief. It landed dead center, the bullseye. The crowd shifted. The earlier smirks faded. Eyes widened, some with surprise, others with respect. Even the skeptics couldn't deny the skill. But I didn't let the moment swell into arrogance. I knew the battle wasn't won yet. Each shot was a step on a longer journey. This shot was proof that I could rise above the doubt, both theirs and my own. And with every arrow, I was learning to silence the whispers, one bullseye at a time. Watching the others shoot, I started noticing details I hadn't before, subtle shifts in their form, the way they gripped their bows, the rhythm of their breathing. It was like watching a dance where every movement mattered, a silent conversation between archer and arrow. One archer in particular caught my eye. Lena, a competitor with years of experience and a reputation for flawless technique. Her stance was steady, her draw smooth, almost effortless. I studied her from the corner of my eye, trying to understand what made her shots so consistent. I realized it wasn't just physical skill, it was mental control. She never rushed. She seemed to flow with the moment, adapting to every gust of wind, every subtle distraction. I took a breath and reminded myself to be patient. Archery isn't about brute strength or flashy moves. It's about finesse and focus, qualities I'd been honing in silence for years. That afternoon, I adjusted my approach. I worked on slowing my movements, matching my breath to my draw. I imagined the arrow slicing through the air like a whisper, guided by calm hands and steady eyes. Practice became meditation. Each release was a lesson in letting go of fear, of doubt, of the noise around me. I didn't have a coach to tell me what to do, but watching others taught me more than any instruction manual ever could. I found myself smiling quietly, grateful for the challenge and for the unexpected teachers around me. Because sometimes learning isn't about being taught, it's about watching, listening, and finding your own way. When I picked up my bow again, something had shifted inside me. The weight of judgment didn't feel so heavy. The path ahead was still steep, but I had tools I hadn't noticed before: patience, focus, and the quiet power of observation. And with that, I was ready to take the next shot. The moment came when I took my shot, one that felt different from all the others. I drew back my bowstring with a quiet confidence, muscles steady, breath slow and deliberate. This wasn't just another arrow, it was a statement. As the arrow flew, slicing through the air, I could almost hear a collective intake of breath from the crowd. Time seemed to slow as it hurtled toward the target. And then it struck, right in the center. Bullseye. The silence that followed was deafening. Some faces froze in disbelief. Others leaned in, eyes wide, mouths slightly open. The woman in the sleek sportswear, who had laughed at me earlier, blinked and nodded ever so slightly. A small, reluctant acknowledgement. But more than their reactions, what I felt was something deeper. A quiet validation that all the hours, all the doubts, all the struggles weren't for nothing. I lowered my bow slowly, allowing the moment to sink in. This shot was more than skill. It was a turning point, a crack in the wall of assumptions that had been built around me. As whispers grew among the crowd, a seasoned archer stepped forward, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "That was impressive," he said, his voice sincere. I nodded in thanks, but didn't let myself get distracted by praise. There was still work to be done, battles to win, and judgments to shatter. One of the archers, a man with graying hair, scoffed from the sidelines. "Beginner's luck," he muttered, but even his tone lacked conviction. I knew the real test was coming. A challenge issued by the best archer on the range. Someone whose respect was hard-earned and whose approval meant everything. But for now, I let the bullseye speak. It said I belonged, and that was enough. It didn't take long before the challenge came. I was still catching my breath from that bullseye when the top archer, Mark, stepped forward. Tall, confident, with a reputation that stretched across the state, he looked me up and down, the same skeptical gaze I'd grown used to. "So, you think you belong here, do you?" His voice carried just enough edge to let everyone hear. "Why don't you prove it? A friendly duel. You and me, one shot each. Winner takes respect." The crowd shifted, eager for the showdown. Some whispered that Mark's skill was unmatched, that no newcomer had ever beaten him. Others eyed me with doubt, betting the duel would end quickly. I met Mark's gaze, feeling the old flutter of nerves mixed with determination. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about showing everyone that simple appearance didn't equal lack of talent. I nodded. "You're on." The tension thickened as we took our places on the line. The air buzzed with anticipation, the crowd silent but charged with energy. Mark went first. His shot was flawless, a perfect bullseye that drew cheers and nods from the onlookers. The pressure was on. I took a deep breath, blocking out the noise, the eyes, the doubt. My fingers gripped the bowstring, and I drew back, steady and calm. I released. The arrow flew straight and true, striking the bullseye dead center. The crowd gasped, then erupted into applause. Even Mark's expression flickered, a mix of surprise and grudging respect. For a brief moment, I stood not as the simple woman in jeans and a plain shirt, but as an equal, a competitor who earned her place. The duel was over, but its impact was just beginning. I could feel the walls of judgment starting to crumble around me. And though the path ahead was still filled with challenges, I was ready to face them all. The crowd was buzzing after the duel, excitement, disbelief, and a new kind of respect rippling through the air. Whispers floated everywhere. "Did you see that shot? She actually matched Mark. Maybe she's the real deal." For the first time that day, I felt the weight of their eyes less like judgment and more like curiosity. The shift was subtle but powerful. I was no longer just an outsider. I was a contender. Yet beneath the applause and congratulations, I knew this was only the beginning. The real test wasn't just the shots or the competition. It was about breaking down the walls people put up based on appearances. I watched as Mark gathered himself, his usual confident grin replaced by something more measured. He approached me with a nod of acknowledgement, no longer dismissive but respectful. "You've got skill," he said quietly, his voice sincere. "Keep this up, and you'll change how people see the game." His words meant more than I expected. Respect from a rival was a powerful thing. Later, as the sun began to dip and the day wound down, I found myself alone at the range, practicing shot after shot. The crowd had dispersed, but I stayed, driven by the quiet joy that comes from knowing you're pushing past limits. Each arrow I released felt lighter, freer. The sting of early judgment faded, replaced by the thrill of progress. In that solitude, I thought about the journey ahead, the challenges, the doubts, the victories yet to come. I knew the path wouldn't be easy, but I also knew something important. Sometimes the quietest people make the loudest impact. And today was proof. The next few days became a whirlwind of preparation. I knew the upcoming challenge would test more than just my aim. It would push my focus, my patience, and my resolve. So, I threw myself into training with a new intensity, determined to sharpen every skill and quiet every doubt. Mornings began before dawn, the cool air filling my lungs as I stretched and warmed up. I practiced my stance, my grip, my release. Every detail mattered. I focused on breathing in rhythm with my movements, building a steady flow that I hoped would carry me through the pressure ahead. In the evenings, I reviewed what I'd learned, studying techniques and mental exercises to keep calm under fire. I meditated on the image of the target, the bullseye glowing in my mind like a beacon, reminding me why I'd come this far. I also watched the archers around me. I noticed how the best stayed calm no matter what, how they treated each shot like a fresh start, not a test of their worth. That mindset was something I wanted to claim as my own. But the most important part of my training was learning to listen to my body, my breath, my instincts. Archery isn't just about physical strength. It's about harmony between mind and muscle, patience and power. I felt the transformation happening, slow but steady. My doubts weren't gone, but they had lost their grip. In their place was a quiet confidence, like a steady flame burning beneath the surface. On the day of the big challenge, I felt ready. Not because I was perfect, but because I had prepared, inside and out. Every arrow I had ever shot led me here. I took one last deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of the bow in my hands. The crowd was watching, waiting, and I was ready to make my mark. The morning of the showdown arrived clear and bright, with a gentle breeze that whispered promises of challenge. As I stepped onto the range, the familiar mix of nerves and excitement settled deep in my chest. This was it, the moment that could change everything. The crowd was larger than before. Faces both familiar and new turned toward the line where I stood. I could feel their eyes, some skeptical, others curious, watching, waiting for me to prove myself once more. Mark, the top archer, was already in position, his stance calm and focused. We exchanged a brief nod, a silent acknowledgement of the battle ahead. I knocked my arrow and took a deep breath, blocking out everything except the target. The wind teased the leaves overhead, but I welcomed the distraction. It was part of the dance between archer and nature. Drawing the bowstring back, I felt the tension build and then released. The arrow flew straight and true, striking close to the center of the target. A ripple of applause ran through the crowd, but I knew there was still more to prove. Mark's shot followed, nearly perfect, his arrow landing just a fraction closer to the bullseye. Round after round, the competition tightened. The pressure was intense, each shot demanding every ounce of focus I could muster. My muscles ached, my breathing slowed, but I stayed rooted in the moment. With each arrow, I chipped away at the doubt, both theirs and my own. By the final round, the score was close. The tension was palpable, the crowd holding its collective breath. I raised my bow one last time, feeling the familiar calm settle over me. This shot wasn't just about winning. It was about proving that a simple woman, underestimated and overlooked, could stand shoulder to shoulder with the best. And this time, There was no room for anything less than greatness. The final moment stretched out like a slow, steady beat in my chest. I stood at the line, bow in hand, the target ahead glowing in the afternoon light. The weight of the day, the expectations, the silent hopes, they all gathered inside me, a storm of anticipation. I knocked my arrow and drew back the string, feeling every muscle tighten in perfect harmony. My breath slowed, steady and deep, as if the world had narrowed down to this single point in time. Then I released. The arrow shot forward, slicing through the air like a whispered promise. It struck the target, not just in the bullseye, but dead center. But something else happened. A split. The arrow's shaft cracked perfectly in half, cleaving through the arrow already lodged there. Gasps echoed across the crowd. Time seemed to freeze. I lowered my bow slowly, heart pounding, as the reality of what had just happened sank in. I had done something no one expected. I'd split the bullseye arrow in half with a single shot. The silence shattered into a roar of applause, cheers ringing through the range. Faces that had once doubted now shone with awe and respect. Mark stepped forward, shaking his head in disbelief, a genuine smile breaking through his usual calm. "That was unbelievable," he said. "You've earned every bit of respect here." I felt a swell of pride, but also a quiet peace. This wasn't just about winning a competition or proving others wrong. It was about breaking through barriers, the ones in their minds and the ones I placed on myself. That split arrow symbolized more than skill. It was a testament to persistence, focus, and belief. In that moment, the simple woman in jeans and a plain shirt was no longer invisible. I had arrived. The applause still echoed as I stepped back from the line, the weight of what I'd just accomplished sinking in. The split arrow was more than a shot. It was a statement, loud and clear, echoing far beyond the archery range. For years, I had faced doubt, from strangers, from skeptics, even sometimes from myself. That moment was a breakthrough, a crack in the walls built by assumptions and appearances. People who had laughed now looked at me with new eyes, eyes that saw skill, determination, and heart beneath the simple clothes and quiet demeanor. Mark approached me again, extending his hand with a smile that held respect, not condescension. "You changed the game today," he said. "Not many can do what you just did." I shook his hand, feeling a surge of gratitude and accomplishment. But more than the praise, what stayed with me was the quiet knowing that I had earned it through every practice, every missed shot, every moment I refused to give up. As the crowd began to disperse, a few younger archers lingered, coming over to ask questions, to learn. That was the moment I realized this was bigger than me. This was about inspiring others who felt unseen or underestimated. The archery range, once a place of doubt and judgment, had become a place of possibility. I packed up my bow, feeling lighter, stronger. The path ahead was still long, and there would be new challenges, but the hardest one, breaking through the walls of expectation, was behind me. I glanced back at the target, the split arrow still embedded in the bullseye, a symbol of perseverance and quiet power. And I smiled, knowing this was just the beginning. After the competition, things started to change, not just in how people saw me, but in how I saw myself. The split arrow became a symbol, a story that spread beyond the range, inspiring whispers of respect and admiration. But the real transformation wasn't just external. It was internal, a shift from doubt to confidence, from second-guessing to belief. I found myself standing taller, speaking with more assurance, knowing that I had faced the toughest opponent of all, my own fears. The younger archers who had approached me after the showdown became unexpected friends. We shared tips, stories, and encouragement. I realized that sometimes the quietest voices carry the strongest messages. The veterans, while slower to change, began to nod in acknowledgement. A few even asked for advice, a humbling but rewarding experience. But I never forgot where I started, the early days when I was laughed at, dismissed, and underestimated. Those memories kept me grounded and fueled my desire to lift others up. I began volunteering to teach beginners, especially those who felt out of place or unsure. Watching their confidence grow reminded me of my own journey. Archery had given me more than skill, it gave me purpose. Every arrow I release now carries not just the weight of competition, but the hope of inspiring someone else. The archery range, once a place where I felt invisible, became a community where I belonged. And though I'm still the simple woman in jeans and a plain shirt, I know now that what truly matters isn't what you wear or how you're judged. It's the strength you carry inside. There was one moment during those early lessons that stayed with me, a shy girl who reminded me so much of myself. She wore oversized clothes, kept her head low, and seemed to shrink in the presence of others. The kind of quiet soul who'd been overlooked too many times. She struggled to draw the bow, frustration flickering in her eyes. I knelt beside her, offering gentle guidance and encouragement. "It's okay to take your time," I told her softly. "Every arrow is a step forward." As we practiced together, I saw her confidence grow, the way her hand steadied, how her gaze lifted to meet the target. It was like watching a flower bloom in slow motion. That moment reminded me why I fought so hard to prove myself, not just for me, but for anyone who had been made to feel less than worthy. It wasn't about trophies or applause. It was about belonging, about knowing that your voice, your effort, your passion mattered. Sometimes, it's the quiet victories that change us most. And as I watched that girl send her first arrow flying true, I felt a surge of hope. Hope that the walls of judgment would crumble. Hope that more simple women like me would find their strength and stand tall. The archery range had become more than a competition ground. It was a place of transformation, healing, and connection. And I was proud to be part of that change. The lessons I learned on that range extended far beyond archery. Every challenge, every doubted shot was a lesson in resilience, in standing firm when the world whispers you don't belong. I began to see that strength wasn't just about hitting bullseyes. It was about showing up day after day, despite the sneers, despite the doubt. It was about owning your journey, no matter how simple or complicated it seemed. I thought about all the times I'd been dismissed, the way people judged me for my plain clothes, my quiet nature, my humble beginnings. And yet, here I was, standing shoulder to shoulder with the best, my skill undeniable. That realization fueled a fire in me. I wanted to be more than a competitor. I wanted to be a symbol, proof that anyone could rise above their circumstances, that true worth lies beneath appearances. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the old doubts crept back, when the weight of expectation threatened to crush me. But then I'd remember the split arrow, that perfect moment where everything came together, and I'd find my center again. I also learned the power of community. The archery range had become a place where people from all walks of life came together, sharing stories and struggles, lifting each other up. Through teaching and mentoring, I discovered the joy of passing on what I'd learned, helping others find their voice and confidence. Archery taught me patience, focus, and humility. But most of all, it taught me to believe in myself. And that belief changed everything. As time passed, I noticed the archery community evolving around me. What started as whispered skepticism turned into genuine curiosity and, eventually, respect. People began to see me not just as a simple woman, but as a skilled archer and a quiet force. I was invited to compete in more tournaments, each one a chance to prove that my success wasn't a fluke. With every event, I felt more confident, my shots more precise, my heart steadier. But more importantly, I found purpose beyond winning medals. I became an advocate for inclusivity in the sport, encouraging others who felt out of place or undervalued to pick up a bow and take aim at their dreams. I spoke at local clubs, shared my story, and helped create spaces where everyone, regardless of background, could feel welcome. The journey wasn't without its challenges. Old doubts and judgments still surface sometimes in subtle ways or unexpected moments. But I faced them head on, knowing that my worth wasn't tied to others' opinions. One day, a young woman approached me after a competition, tears in her eyes. She told me how my story inspired her to keep going despite her own struggles. That moment reminded me why I started all of this, not for recognition, but to be a beacon of hope for anyone who ever felt overlooked. Archery taught me that true strength comes from within, from perseverance, belief, and kindness. And as I continue my journey, I carry that lesson with me, a quiet reminder that sometimes the simplest person can make the most powerful impact. Every competition, every practice session was a lesson in humility. Archery reminded me that no matter how skilled you become, there's always room to learn and grow. Each arrow shot was a chance to improve, to refine my technique, to quiet my mind, to strengthen my spirit. I learned to celebrate the small victories, a steady release, a better grouping, the feel of a perfect shot. Those moments fueled me, reminding me that progress isn't always about grand gestures, but consistent effort. The community around me grew too. We shared stories of struggle and success, encouragement and challenge. Together, we created a space where everyone could bring their whole selves, flaws, fears, and all, without judgment. I found that teaching others was as much a gift to me as it was to them. Watching beginners find their confidence, hearing their laughter and excitement, reminded me of why I fell in love with archery in the first place. It wasn't just about hitting the target. It was about finding peace, purpose, and connection. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, I stood at the range watching a group of newcomers practicing. Their smiles were wide, their movements eager. They reminded me of myself, uncertain but hopeful. I knew the path ahead for them wouldn't always be easy. There would be doubts, setbacks, and maybe even moments of ridicule. But I also knew that with patience and perseverance, they could find their own strength. Archery had given me more than skill. It gave me resilience, a sense of belonging, and a chance to inspire others. And that was the true reward. The archery range had become more than just a place to shoot arrows. It was a place of healing and transformation. I watched as people came not just to compete, but to find community, to connect, and to grow. There was a quiet magic in those shared moments between the draw of the bowstring and the flight of the arrow that went beyond sport. It was about trust in yourself, in your abilities, and in those around you. I often thought back to the early days when I was laughed at and dismissed. Those memories fueled my determination to create a better space for others, a place where no one would be judged for their appearance or background. Slowly, that vision became reality. The range welcomed newcomers from all walks of life. People who had once felt invisible began to stand tall, their confidence blossoming with every arrow they released. There was joy in the simple victories, a bullseye hit, a steady hand, a newfound smile. And for me, the greatest reward was seeing others discover their own strength, the same strength I had fought so hard to find. One afternoon, a group of children from a nearby community center came to visit. Their eyes sparkled with wonder as they tried their first shots, their laughter filling the air. I knelt beside a shy boy struggling to draw his bow. "Take your time," I said gently. "You've got this." When his arrow finally struck the target, his face lit up with pride. It was a moment I would never forget. In those moments, I realized archery was never just about hitting a target. It was about hitting the mark in life, finding courage, resilience, and connection. And I was proud to help others find their way. Looking back, it's incredible how far this journey has taken me. From the quiet girl in jeans and a simple shirt, laughed at and overlooked, to a woman who stands proud at the archery range, respected and seen. But the greatest victory wasn't the trophies or the applause. It was the transformation in myself and in those I've met along the way. I learned that true strength isn't about how you look or what others expect of you. It's about belief, persistence, and the courage to stand tall, even when the world doubts you. That split arrow in the bullseye was more than a perfect shot. It was a symbol, a reminder that assumptions can be shattered, and that quiet determination can break through the loudest doubts. The archery range became a place of possibility, a community where anyone could find their voice and their power. And I hope my story inspires others to pick up their bows, to aim high, and to believe that they belong, no matter who they are or where they come from. Because sometimes the simplest people make the biggest impact, and sometimes a single arrow can change everything.